When no contact begins, it creates a powerful ripple in the emotional waters. The silence is deafening, and for the one on the receiving end, it lands like a bolt from the blue. They find themselves disoriented, grappling with a void they hadn't prepared for. You see, human beings thrive on connection, even in relationships that aren't particularly harmonious. There's a rhythm, a predictability, a sense of being tethered to something. When that rhythm stops, it feels like the world tilts ever so slightly and nothing fits quite the same. In this initial stage, they often don't even realize what's happening. It's not just the absence of your presence, but the absence of the validation, attention, or even conflict that you once provided. Suddenly, the phone doesn't light up with your messages. There are no calls to anticipate, no familiar words to either soothe or provoke. And this absence, it speaks louder than anything you could have said. At first, they might not admit that this silence affects them. People are good at pretending, especially when their ego is at stake. They may carry on with their routine, putting on a show of normalcy. But beneath the surface, there's a disruption, a quiet unease that they can't quite shake off. It's like when you lose something small but essential, your keys, a wallet, and at first you think it'll turn up. But as minutes tick by, the worry sets in. That's what the initial shock feels like, an unsettling realization that something important is missing. And yet, in this stage, they may try to downplay it, both to themselves and to those around them. It's no big deal, say, I'll hear from them soon, but their mind doesn't rest so easily. There's a kind of instinctive reaction, a subconscious awareness that something significant has shifted. The balance has tipped, and they don't know how to restore it. This is the beauty and power of no contact. It doesn't require loud declarations or dramatic exits. It's the quiet withdrawal that forces them to sit with their own thoughts, to feel the weight of the silence. It's a kind of mirror, reflecting back to them what they've taken for granted, what they've overlooked or undervalued. In the absence of noise, they begin to hear the echoes of their own choices, their own actions or inactions. The shock doesn't just come from the sudden halt in communication. It's deeper than that. It's the realization that they no longer have the access they once did. They can no longer casually reach out, no longer rely on your energy, your presence, to fill the gaps in their life. It's a withdrawal of not just words, but of energy, of attention, of care. And that absence, it stings. Even if they won't admit it, even if they try to brush it off, it leaves an imprint. But here's what's fascinating in this stage: they often won't act. Shock has a way of paralyzing people. They're stunned, but not yet ready to move. Instead, they sit in this strange limbo, unsure of what to do next. They may distract themselves, filling the silence with noise, with activity, with other people. But these distractions are fleeting, shallow. The absence remains a quiet hum. In the background, a reminder of what's missing. This stage lays the foundation for everything that follows. It's the crack that opens the door to introspection, to doubt, to all the other stages that come next. Without this initial jolt, there would be no progression, no growth, no realization. It's the first domino to fall, setting off a chain reaction that they cannot stop. And so, in this moment of shock, something important happens. They begin to feel your absence, not just notice it, but feel it deeply, viscerally. It's no longer about you simply not being there. It's about the void you've left behind, a void that their ego can't fill, no matter how hard it tries. Silence is a powerful teacher. It doesn't lecture or argue, it simply exists, waiting to be understood. And in this initial shock, they're faced with the stark reality of what life feels like without you in it. It's not a punishment, it's a reflection. And in that reflection lies the seed of change. Sometimes the most profound realizations come not from what is said, but from what is left unsaid. Silence speaks volumes, and in the absence of your voice, they begin to hear their own. Once the initial shock of no contact wears off, something interesting happens. Their mind begins to wander into the realm of questioning. You see, when someone is left with no immediate answers, the natural tendency is to fill the silence with their own stories. And so they start to ask themselves, why did this happen? What did I miss? What are they thinking? This questioning stage is powerful, because it's where the ego starts to crack, even if just a little. At first, their thoughts might come from a defensive place. They might justify their actions, replay old arguments in their mind, or convince themselves that you're the one overreacting. But deep down, beneath the layers of pride and rationalization, there's a small voice asking, did I do something wrong? What's fascinating about this process is how relentless the mind becomes when it doesn't have closure. The absence of contact creates a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. So their thoughts rush in to fill the empty space. They start replaying your interactions, analyzing your words, searching for clues about what led to this silence. They go over things they said, things they didn't say, things they might have done differently. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. And the more they think, the more they realize how much of the picture they failed to see when you were still there. During this stage, they also begin to notice what your presence brought into their life. It's not always the big things, though those matter too, but the little seemingly inconsequential moments. Maybe it was your laughter, the way you listened, the way you made them feel seen and understood. These realizations don't come all at once. They creep in subtle and persistent, like sunlight finding its way through the cracks in a closed curtain. But there's a twist to this questioning stage. While part of their mind is trying to make sense of your absence, another part is grappling with the discomfort it brings. You see, when someone is used to having access to you, even if they didn't always value it, the sudden loss can feel like a kind of withdrawal. And withdrawal is uncomfortable. It forces them to confront the ways in which they relied on you emotionally, mentally, sometimes even physically. It's not always a pretty realization, and that's why the ego resists it. At this point, they may oscillate between curiosity and denial. One moment they're diving into the questions, trying to understand. The next, they're pushing those questions away, telling themselves it doesn't matter. This back and forth is part of the process. It's messy and confusing, but it's also necessary. Because in that confusion, they begin to see things they couldn't, or wouldn't, see before. Here's where no contact does its most profound work. By stepping back, you've created a space for them to look inward. And looking inward isn't easy. It's much easier to point fingers, to shift blame, to stay in the comfort of old patterns. But the silence you've left forces them to face themselves. It's not just about you anymore. It's about them, their actions, their choices, their inability or unwillingness to show up in the way you needed them to. The beauty of this stage is that it's not something you can force. It happens naturally in its own time and in its own way. Your silence isn't a weapon, it's a mirror. And in that mirror, they start to see not only who they were to you, but who they are to themselves. As they question and reflect, something subtle but significant begins to shift. The questions they ask stop being about you and start being about them. Why did I act that way? What is it about me that contributed to this? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are also transformative. They open the door to self-awareness, to growth, to a deeper understanding of what it means to truly connect with another person. And here's the irony: by stepping away, you've given them the opportunity to step closer to themselves. You've created a space where they can begin to see the truth of their own behavior, their own needs, their own fears. This is not a process they would have chosen, but it's one they needed. And it all begins with the questions that only silence can provoke. In this stage, they're no longer just reacting to the loss of contact, they're starting to feel the weight of it. They're beginning to realize that your absence isn't just about the lack of communication. It's about the loss of something much deeper, your energy, your presence, your essence. And that loss is not something they can easily replace. Sometimes the most profound realizations come not in the noise of confrontation, but in the quiet of introspection. And as they sit with their questions, they're learning one of life's most important lessons. The answers we seek from others often lie within ourselves. Once the haze of confusion begins to lift, they enter a stage of emotional reckoning. This is where the walls they've built around their feelings start to crumble. All the defenses, the rationalizations, the I don't care facade, they begin to weaken under the weight of reality. And reality in its purest form is always simple. They miss you. They feel it now deeply and undeniably. This stage can be overwhelming because it demands vulnerability, something most of us are conditioned to avoid. To admit that we care, that we feel pain or regret, can feel like a betrayal of our own pride. Yet the absence of your presence leaves a void that pride alone cannot fill. That void is like an ache that refuses to be ignored. It lingers in the spaces they used to take for granted, spaces filled with your words, your laughter, your silent understanding. What's remarkable about this stage is how it strips away all pretense. When someone finally feels the full weight of their emotions, they are left exposed, raw, and undeniably human. They may try to distract themselves, diving into work, hobbies, or even other relationships, but those efforts often feel hollow. It's like trying to run from your own shadow. No matter where you go, it follows. The emotional reckoning isn't just about sadness or regret. It's also about recognizing what they lost and perhaps for the first time understanding why it mattered. You see, in the busyness of life, we often overlook the profound impact someone has on us until they're no longer there. It's not just about the big moments, it's the small, seemingly mundane ones that start to stand out. The way you listened without judgment, the way you made them laugh on their worst days, the way your presence felt like a steady anchor in an unpredictable world. Now, stripped of those moments, they begin to grasp their true value. And this realization, it hurts. Not in a dramatic, theatrical way, but in the quiet, persistent ache, oh, I didn't appreciate what I had when I had it. This is where growth has the potential to occur, but only if they're willing to sit with that discomfort and let it teach them something. Emotional reckoning is a crossroads. Some will lean into it, allowing themselves to process, to feel, to learn. Others will resist, burying their emotions under layers of distraction or denial. But even resistance has its limits. Our emotions, like water, have a way of finding their way to the surface, no matter how tightly we try to contain them. What makes this stage so transformative is that it's deeply personal. No one else can walk this path for them. It's a solitary journey, one that requires them to face not only the loss of you, but also the parts of themselves they've ignored or avoided. And that's where the real work begins. Because to truly understand what they lost, they must first understand who they were when they had it and who they want to become moving forward. For some, this reckoning might lead to action. They might reach out hoping to bridge the gap and express what they're finally ready to admit. For others, it might be a quieter journey of introspection and self-discovery. But regardless of how it manifests, the process is the same, an unraveling of the old to make way for something new. This stage isn't easy, nor is it quick, but it's necessary, Because without this emotional reckoning, there can be no growth, no healing, no meaningful change. And as uncomfortable as it may be, it's a gift in disguise. It forces them to confront not only the loss of you, but also the loss of their own authenticity. In this silence, in this absence, they are finally able to see themselves clearly. And clarity, while often painful, is always liberating. It's the first step toward transformation, toward becoming someone who no longer takes for granted the things or the people that truly matter. When emotions are left unchecked, they can consume us. But when we face them, we begin to reclaim our power. And that's the beauty of this stage, it reminds them, and perhaps even you. That vulnerability is not a weakness. It's a gateway to growth, to connection, to understanding what it truly means to be human. In the end, this reckoning isn't just about what they feel for you. It's about what they learn about themselves through the process. And that lesson, it's one they'll carry with them, whether they realize it or not. Emotional reckoning is both a mirror and a map. It shows us where we've been and guides us toward where we need to go. And for them, this journey is just beginning. When the weight of emotions begins to settle, and they've spent time grappling with their inner turmoil, they may find themselves at a stage of quiet reflection. This stage isn't as dramatic as the initial burst of pain, or as exhausting as the emotional reckoning. It's quieter, slower, almost contemplative. It's where the initial sharpness of their feelings begins to dull, and they're left with questions. Questions about you, themselves, and the connection you shared. In this phase, their mind begins to replay the story of your relationship, almost like a movie reel. They revisit moments, both good and bad, searching for meaning. They'll pick apart conversations, scrutinize actions, and attempt to find the why behind it all. Why did things happen the way they did? Why did they respond the way they did? And perhaps most importantly, why does your absence still feel so profound? This reflection isn't just about nostalgia or regret, it's about understanding. You see, in the heat of any relationship, whether it's flourishing or falling apart, we rarely have the clarity to step back and see the bigger picture. It's only in the quiet aftermath, when the dust has settled, that we can begin to piece together what it all meant. And for them, this is that moment. What they might discover during this time is a deeper appreciation for the lessons embedded in your connection. They may realize that your presence taught them something invaluable about love, about boundaries, about themselves. Sometimes these realizations come with gratitude, and other times with a sting of regret. Because in hindsight, it's so easy to see the things we should have done differently. But this is the beauty of reflection. It's not about changing the past, it's about learning from it. This stage also brings with it a sense of humility. To reflect honestly, one has to set aside ego, to look at things not through the lens of blame, but through the lens of truth. That's not an easy thing to do. It requires them to confront not just the ways they may have been hurt, but also the ways they might have hurt you. And this, as time continues to pass, they might enter a stage that feels deceptively calm, almost like a lull after a storm. This is the stage of rebalancing, where the chaos of emotions has begun to settle and they start to reorient themselves in the world without you. It's not that they've forgotten or fully moved on, it's more that they're finding a way to exist within the space that your absence has created. This stage is marked by an effort to reclaim stability. Life, after all, demands to be lived. There are routines to follow, responsibilities to meet, and distractions to seek. They might throw themselves into work or immerse themselves in hobbies. They might lean on friends, not necessarily to talk about you, but simply to feel connected to something familiar and grounding. They may even start new habits or ventures, trying to prove perhaps more to themselves than anyone else that they can move forward. But here's the curious thing about rebalancing. It doesn't mean they're unaffected. Far from it. The process of trying to regain a sense of normalcy often brings unexpected moments of vulnerability. They might be out with friends laughing over something trivial, and suddenly a thought of you crosses their mind. It could be triggered by a song, a place, or even a passing comment, and just like that, they're pulled back into the depth of what they thought they had already overcome. This is the paradox of healing. On the surface, everything might seem fine, calm, collected, even happy. But beneath that surface, the heart continues to carry its burdens, and it's in those quiet, unguarded moments that the weight of your absence is truly felt. It's not a dramatic kind of pain anymore. It's subtler, almost like a whisper that lingers in the background of their life. They might not even realize it's there until something or someone reminds them. During this phase, they may also begin to reevaluate their desires and priorities. The person they were when they were with you and the person they're becoming now might not entirely align. They may start to question whether they handled things the way they should have, whether they truly valued the connection while they had it. And these realizations can be sobering. Sometimes they'll inspire growth and change, and other times they'll bring a quiet sense of loss for what can no longer be recovered. This stage is also where the power dynamics shift. If, in the earlier stages, they were consumed by thoughts of you and the immediate aftermath of no contact, this is where they might try to regain a sense of control. But not control over you, control over their own narrative. They start to focus more on who they want to be rather than who they were in relation to you. They may tell themselves that they're better off or convince themselves that it's for the best. And maybe it is. Or maybe it's simply their way of coping with the reality that some doors once closed may never reopen. But let's not mistake this for indifference. Even as they strive for balance, even as they attempt to rebuild, a part of them remains tied to what was shared. This isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of humanity. We are shaped by the connections we make, and no amount of rebalancing can erase the impact of someone who mattered. What they're really trying to do in this stage is find a way to carry the memory of you without letting it define them. And here's the truth: the process of rebalancing isn't linear. Some days they'll feel strong, resilient, even optimistic. Other days they'll feel like they've taken a step backward, as if they're right back where they started. But this is how healing works: messy, unpredictable, and deeply personal. It's not about erasing the past, but integrating it into the fabric of their life in a way that allows them to move forward. By the end of this stage, they might feel a little more like themselves again. Not entirely the same, of course, because how could they be? But perhaps a version of themselves that is steadier, wiser, and more self-aware. And yet, even as they stand on this new foundation, a part of them might still wonder, what if things had been different? What if the story hadn't ended when it did? That question, unspoken but ever present, is what keeps the thread of connection alive, even in the midst of distance. Because no matter how much they rebalance, no matter how much they tell themselves they've moved on, the truth is, your presence has left a mark. And marks like that are not so easily forgotten. As the journey continues, they reach a stage that is both the most profound and the most delicate acquired acceptance. It's not the kind of acceptance that comes with joy or celebration, but the kind that settles in like a soft sigh after a long and exhausting storm. This is where they begin to understand that not all questions have answers, and not all endings lead to closure. In this stage, they stop trying to rewrite the past or imagine how things could have been different. They stop rehearsing conversations that will never take place or replaying moments they wish they could change. Instead, they start to sit with what is. And in doing so, they begin to see the situation not as something that needs to be fixed, but as something that simply exists like a mountain in the distance, unmoving, unchangeable, and yet oddly beautiful in its permanence. This acceptance doesn't come easily. It requires them to let go of their grip on control, to stop fighting against reality and instead flow with it. It's a surrender, but not in the sense of defeat. It's a surrender to the understanding that life is not meant to be a tidy, predictable affair. It is wild, chaotic, and full of contradictions. And in that chaos there is an undeniable truth: not everything was meant to stay, and not every connection was meant to last forever. In this stage, they might also begin to reframe the experience not as a loss, but as a lesson. They start to see how the pain has shaped them, how it has carved out spaces within them that are now filled with wisdom, strength, and a deeper understanding of themselves. The things they once resented begin to take on a new meaning. They realize that even the hardest moments have something to teach, something to offer. And perhaps the most significant lesson of all is this: the ability to let go is a gift, not a weakness. But letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean they erase you from their memory or pretend the connection never existed. Instead, they carry it with them not as a burden, but as a part of their story. They learn to hold it lightly, to appreciate it for what it was, even if it wasn't what they wanted it to be. This is the paradox of acceptance. It doesn't diminish the significance of the past, it honors it by allowing it to rest. As they move through this stage, something remarkable begins to happen. The space that was once filled with longing, regret, or anger begins to open up. And in that space, new possibilities emerge. They start to see life not as a series of endings, but as a series of beginnings. The pain, once so consuming, begins to fade not because it has been resolved, but because it has been integrated. It becomes a part of who they are, but it no longer defines them. This is the moment when they realize that the greatest revenge, if it can even be called that, is not bitterness or retribution. It's not proving something to you or to anyone else. It's the quiet and profound act of moving forward, of living fully and authentically, despite the hurt. It's realizing that their worth was never tied to the situation or to your opinion of them. It was always theirs, unshaken and unchanging. And so they step into the next chapter of their life not as someone who has been broken, but as someone who has been transformed. They understand now that every experience, no matter how painful, is a thread in the larger tapestry of their existence. And that tapestry, in all its complexity and imperfection, is what makes them who they are. In the end, they don't need closure from you. They don't need validation or explanation. They've found something far more valuable: a sense of peace that comes from within. It's not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding pain, but the kind that comes from walking through it and emerging on the other side stronger and more whole than before. And as they stand in this place of quiet strength, they might look back not with regret, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the experience, for the growth, and even for the pain, because it's all part of the journey. It's all part of becoming the person they were meant to be. And so they let go, not out of anger, not out of indifference, but out of love. Love for themselves, love for the life that still awaits them, and love for the endless possibilities that come with every new beginning. That's the beauty of acceptance. It doesn't just free them from the past, it opens the door to the future.